Hello, everybody. It is now time to start the presentation. Welcome to the webinar, Presenting Data Effectively, with author, speaker, and researcher, Dr. Stephanie Evergreen. Before we begin Dr. Evergreen's presentation, we have a quick poll we'd like you to take. You should see it on the screen in front of you now. We'd like to know, how would you rate your proficiency when it comes to presenting data? We'll give you just a minute to answer that poll on the screen in front of you. This kind of information is always helpful to us. We love to get to know our audience as we get into the presentation. Give you another few seconds to answer here. And what do we have? Okay, looks like a bunch of us are fairly confident when it comes to presenting data. Others of us less so, and small percentages on either end. Well, that's always helpful to know as we go into the presentation, know who your colleagues are, and helps us to get to know you. All right, let's get started today. I am pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Stephanie Evergreen. Dr. Evergreen is an internationally recognized speaker, designer, and researcher. She's best known for bringing a research-based approach to helping researchers better communicate their work through more effective graphs, slides, and reports. She holds a PhD from Western Michigan University in interdisciplinary evaluation and is the author of 2 Sage books, Effective Data Visualization and the newly revised Presenting Data Effectively. Today's 1-hour webinar will be recorded and archived for future viewing. We'll be sending out a link to view that recording in the coming weeks. If you have any problems with audio or viewing mode during the webinar, please use that Q&A box at the right of your screen, and one of our helpful team members will get back to you ASAP. At the end of the webinar, we'll have some time for Q&A from attendees, so please also use that Q&A box to ask any questions to our speaker throughout the webinar. Please also take note of the webinar hashtag, SageTalks, and feel free to ask questions or leave comments there. You can also tag our speaker, Dr. Stephanie Evergreen, using her Twitter handle, Evergreen Data. In today's discussion, you'll learn the science behind presenting data effectively, and we'll leave with direct, pointed changes that you can immediately implement to communicate data with maximum impact and clarity. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Stephanie Evergreen. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks, Susanna. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Wonderful.
All right, I just wanted to get things set up here. Awesome. Okay, so thanks for joining me. I am super excited to talk to you about my latest revised book. I'm actually going to talk to you a bit about things that are in both of my books, and it all starts with this sign. So let's say you arrive at a restaurant, you get seated at your table, you order your Bloody Marys, you start thinking about your food, and you decide you're going to run to the restroom to wash your hands. You go into the bathroom, and this is the sign that you see. Now, I'm going to ask you to go to the questions box to give me some commentary here. So locate that questions box. You're going to need to use it a couple of times during our hour together today. So find it now and type in for me what comes to mind for you when you see a sign like this. What does this make you think about the food that you are about to get? What does this make you think about the quality of the drink that is out at your table? What does this make you think about the training of the kitchen staff? So tell me some things that come to mind for you. And we have over 400 people on the line, so we're seeing lots of comments come in. But I'm seeing things like, oh, employees are careless. Maybe they've got some sloppy work habits. Maybe employees aren't washing their hands. Some questionable quality. Maybe things are a bit mediocre or lackluster. A poor attention to detail. Exactly. And it's not good if people have to be reminded to wash their hands. That's true. It does. I mean, so some people are saying things that are quite clear on the surface, like poor grammar, typos, poor spelling. There is the wrong form of the word there. But right underneath that is stuff that makes us question the quality of what's going on in there, you know? Latoya says, I question the integrity of the company. Exactly. You start to get into some of those larger judgments based off of typos and incorrect apostrophes and things like that. So the sad news is that that feeling that we all get that something's not quite right here, well, we're also in that same boat. I mean, we are in some ways the kitchen staff, the restaurant owners who made the bad signs. Anytime we're putting out graphs or reports or slides, people are using them. They're using them to judge our integrity and our quality and whether we have any idea what we're doing, just like we're judging this restaurant. And so this is actually kind of some sad news, right? Because we would expect them to have a high quality. That's what we're paying for. And that's the same thing people expect from us, that we're going to be giving them high quality work. But when we have graphs that look sloppy, or when we have reports that are incoherent and hard to get through, or we have slides that are so dense they just look like I'd rather check Facebook. When we have things like that, people are judging us. They're saying that we can't pay attention to detail, that we don't really know what we're doing. And the stuff that makes this so unfortunate is that we didn't go to school. We never got any training in anything like this. Nobody ever said as we were coming up through academia, you better know how to make a great graph. It's not in a job description anywhere for most of us. When we get hired, our job description doesn't say, oh, by the way, you have to be excellent at everything in your subject area, and you have to know how to make killer slideshows because your entire credibility is going to hinge on this. No one tells us this. So that's unfortunate, but what we're going to do is figure out how we can get some of that training on our own now. And the training is in my two books. So one book covers chart choosing. So I'm going to give you a little taste of what that looks like right now. And you're going to need to find that questions box once again, because I'm going to want you to type some things in here, okay? So I'm going to give you these two percentages. And I'm going to give you about 1 minute on the clock. I'm going to start my timer here. And I want you to generate as many ways as you can that you would use to visualize these two percentages. So use whatever kinds of things come to mind for you, but just rattle off as much as you can in the next minute. All right? Okay, the timer has started. And we have like 445 of you, and I'm sure you can all come up with several ways to visualize this. So we're seeing the questions box just get loaded. Awesome. A lot of people are saying pie chart, and this is totally true. A lot of people are saying bar chart, but what else can you come up with? You got about 30 seconds left, so generate more. "15 seconds left. What else can you push yourself to think of here?" Okay, great. That's your time. Minute is up. Fingers off the keyboard. I'm seeing so many great things in here. So we have stuff that's pretty standard, like a pie chart or a bar chart. I see things like tree maps or line plots or pictographs. Even someone said a chocolate bar, which I love this idea, like maybe 3/4 of it in one chunk and 1/4 of it in another chunk. I think you came up with some great ideas in here. This is the good news and the bad news, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of options. I mean, you came up with so many different options in here. And it's hard to know how to weed through all of these options. So the choice here depends on a couple of things. It depends a bit on what our audience is going to need from us. Like if we are talking to members of the public who often get data scared, they want a chocolate bar. They do. When they see a regular graph, they get turned off. They feel like it's overwhelming and they just go check Facebook. But if we're going to an academic conference with academic peers, they want to see it. We can't bring a chocolate bar. I mean, they might appreciate that, but they're not going to find it super credible. They're going to need something like a bar chart. They probably are going to want confidence intervals on it, you know, stuff like that. And there's this whole spectrum in between. So it depends a bit on what our audience really needs in order to hear us. It also depends on our audience's brains, and I stick to the research. I have a PhD, and once you get your PhD, you're kind of a research nerd for the rest of your life. So I'm going to talk to you about the research on how human brains interpret data, how they interpret graphs. And this research came from Cleveland and McGill. Cleveland is one of the grandfathers in the data visualization community. And he had this theory about what chart types human brains interpret with the most accuracy. His end variables there were ease and accuracy. So he teamed up with McGill in 1984. They published this work. They ran like a series of mini studies, and they were mainly done on college students and their brains, so that's always a caveat I put out there. But what they found in the data was this hierarchy. And they basically say at the top of the hierarchy, the easiest thing for human brains to interpret with accuracy is position, like just some dots on a scale. And this is a little confusing because we don't really see that very much in our lives. Next best, they said, was still position. They can even be in two separate graphs as long as the y-axis is the same, we can compare those. I know it's not totally helpful yet, but hang here with me. Down below that, they said length and then direction and then angle. So length is where we get bar charts and column charts. Our brains are really good at interpreting those. Direction is where we get things like a line graph or a slope graph. And angle is where we get pie charts. They did a lot of their little mini studies between these three right here in the second row to see how this order was going to shake out. And every single time, angle produced the most error. Pie charts produced the most error. Now, I think if you show somebody a pie chart that's 25/75, they're going to instantly recognize that that's what you're showing them, and you're going to be fine. But I think if you show somebody a pie chart that's like 70/30, they're going to have a much harder time telling you what those exact numbers are. Or when you try to slice in like 3 or 4 or 5 more wedges into the pie, it gets really difficult. Down below that, they said area, volume, and curvature. So area is where you get things like bubble charts. Volume is going to be anything 3D, and curvature is where you get donut charts and some other kind of like fancy graph types that you might see these days. The data on these at the bottom was so bad. In the initial mini studies that they were running, they saw how horrible we were at interpreting those with ease and accuracy that they ended up dropping them from the rest of the mini study sequence. Down with that group, they also said shading. I've put shading off to the side, though, because this really isn't so much the case anymore. But back in 1984, the only way that we had to show shading was this like terrible pattern fill crosshatch thing. I'm sure some of you remember having to use that. And yeah, we've since seen research that shows it causes optical illusions. Like if you blur your eyes, you'll see a unicorn or something. And that is probably not what we're going for. But we don't really have this problem anymore. Now we can communicate with color quite easily. And the research shows that we can distinguish between about 4 shades of one color before things start to get difficult for people. So color coding is a decent way of showing data, of visualizing data, like heat maps or something along those lines. So I don't know where it goes in this hierarchy now. I have seen research that has replicated this original study many times, but I haven't seen anybody put shading somewhere else. Anyway, the point is Cleveland and McGill are saying we should be trying to go as high up in this hierarchy as we can because that's what human brains are going to be able to interpret easily and accurately. So we have what is it that they need from us, something like a chocolate bar or something that's a little bit more graph-like. And in terms of the things that are more graph-like, Cleveland and McGill want us to be going as high up in the hierarchy as we can. Of course, the other thing we have to keep in mind is the story that we're trying to tell, and that is how my book, Effective Data Visualization, is entirely organized. It's around the stories that we have to tell in our work. So one of the stories we often have to tell is how 2 numbers are alike, or maybe they're not alike at all, and that's our point. But comparing these 2 things is the main story that we have to tell. And the way I see people do this commonly is a side-by-side bar chart. And this is judging things by length. It's totally fine. We're going to be great at this. As long as the bar chart starts at 0, we're going to judge that length, and we're going to be able to interpret this pretty well. The problem is that even though the research says we're good at length, the research also says we're bad at comparing non-adjacent lengths. So if we wanted to compare the youth in Michigan to the youth in the US, it's too far for our eyes and our brains to have to travel. We're really limited to just comparing the 2 things that are right next to each other. And that's why we have to have more options. One option I see often is a back-to-back graph. It also goes by the name population pyramid. And this is the best graph type when what you're trying to compare is the overall shapes of data sets, not necessarily like individual responses, but overall shapes. Our brains seek symmetry. So if we have some kind of natural shape to this, or if we make a shape where one side is ordered greatest to least, our brains see where the other side is not. So this is great when your real point here is to look at the overall shapes of data sets, not necessarily to compare individual answers. Let's get another option in here. This might be my favorite graph of all time because this is a dot plot. This is position. This is the thing at the top of the Cleveland and McGill hierarchy. It's the easiest thing for human brains to interpret. Now, when I talk to people who work with data all day, people who are really used to Excel or whatever, who love their spreadsheets, they tend to not like this very much because it's new, because it's not a default graph type in Excel. But when we show this to people who are not big data nerds, they instantly can read it. They love it because they just instantly get it, since it's just this dot encoding the data. So this position, the sense of dots, is actually really powerful. And once we start thinking about how powerful dots are, we can use them in different ways, like a lollipop graph. So I love lollipop graphs. They're a great option when a regular bar chart, like the one on the left here, is just too much. Sometimes we end up with these bar charts that are just so dense and complicated, like there's so much data in them that it's kind of visually overpowering. And the lollipop is great because it takes out a bunch of that noise. I mean, if you think about it, in a bar chart, we are looking at the length, but what we're really interested in is the point at the end, where the bar stops. That's what's encoding our data. So the lollipop puts the emphasis right at that point, and it reduces the rest of the ink, so it's less visually demanding. Lollipops are great, still using position. They can also be vertical. We can have vertical lollipops that look a bit like the dot plot. So once we start thinking about dots, we can do all kinds of things with them. But I do want to go back to bars for a minute, because there's another one, maybe my second runner-up of favorite graph type of all time, is what I'm calling the overlapping bar. And I love this graph type because it's telling us this story about how these two things here are inherently a part of each other. When we're talking about budgeted amounts versus actual amounts, these are not two independent entities. And if we were to put these in a side-by-side bar chart, they would look like they're two separate, distinct elements that exist in the world, but they aren't. One is inherently a part of the other one. So we've got to make that really clear by putting the graphs inside each other, by putting one set of data inside the other set of data. It's an overlapping bar chart. And it's just such a powerful story about how these things are interconnected inherently. One is in part of the other one. Awesome. So we're going through lots of options here for how to compare numbers, how to show that two numbers are alike or how they're not alike. And the reason that we have to have many options in them is because what I see people typically do is stuff like this. And don't feel bad. I made this on the plane ride home from training inside of a Fortune 500. They were making it there too. In fact, I see this everywhere in the world that I travel. I just came from Amsterdam, and guess what I saw there? These same bar graphs. So don't feel bad if they look really familiar to you, because they probably are. You're probably doing them too. We all do. Now, this is a lot, right? This is a very visually demanding graph. It's a bit hard to read. If you look at the legend, these are actually years. So you would think this would be better as a line graph, because that's how we're used to showing change over time. So I made a line graph, and I was like, yeah, that's also completely bananas. That's not going to work at all. So the answer, when you tried a couple different graph types and nothing's working out, the answer is always going to be to break them out into small multiples. That's small multiple graphs, all in the same scale, in the same field of vision, so that we can really just see each data set in its own moment in the sunshine. We get clarity this way. So small multiples is like your secret weapon. It's going to be the answer when you tried a couple different graph types and none of them are working. It's always going to be small multiples. So I see people asking me questions about, like, this is so awesome. How do I do this? Did you make this in Excel? Yes. These are all Excel graphs, and the step-by-step instructions, they're all in my book, Effective Data Visualization. It talks you through how to make the best chart type, and then it shows you exactly how to make it inside Excel. The other book covers a slightly broader topic, talking about how we pull all of this stuff together, because we are rarely ever making just like one graph that sits alone in the ether. It's going to go in a slideshow or a dashboard or a report or something like that. So we really need to start talking about those broader mechanisms and how graphs fit in. So let's talk through some of the high points here. Often when we're going to give a talk about data, we have a slideshow. Now, you don't have to have a slideshow. You could give a talk that has 0 slides. People would just look at you, and this is okay. You can do that. I know it makes us uncomfortable, so we like to have a slide there. I get it. Your slides are going to look better than this. This is an actual graph I gave to my clients a couple of years before I figured out what I was really supposed to do. Before I knew about data visualization at all, this is what I gave them. So your slides are going to look better than this. I actually want to show you a shortcut, a cool tool for putting graphs on slides. And to do that, I've got to back out of my slides here. So now I'm not in full screen mode anymore, but that's okay because I want you to see this. So in this slide here, I have an active Excel graph. You see what I mean there? Like I can still click on all the parts, and they're all active. It's a real Excel graph, not a picture. When you use a real Excel graph inside PowerPoint, this is why I love Microsoft products, because they talk to each other. I can animate this graph. So I would go to the Animations tab, and the only animation you're allowed to use is Appear. See it? Appear? It's the only one you can use. We're not going to like wheel or pulse or teeter our data. We're just going to use Appear, all right? So we click on Appear, and then we get this button at the end that says Effect Options, and it looks like a graph. You're not going to see that unless this is an active Excel graph inside PowerPoint. So when you open this up, you get some choices in here, and to be honest with you, I end up just like clicking each one of these and testing it out to see what it's going to do. But when I run my slides live, it starts off blank. So I can set the stage with my audience all day long without anybody starting to ask me questions about what's on this screen, because there's nothing there. And then when I click, when I'm ready, it brings in just the skeleton of the slide. So I can say, hi, I'm here to talk to you about this main point. I'm going to show you the evidence that supports this point. The evidence runs from 2006 to 2012, blah, blah, blah. We orient people to what we're about to discuss. And then when we're ready, I click and I bring in just one line. So, and that line just appears. It doesn't cartwheel in, right? This lets us talk about the 9th graders all day long, as much as we need to, without anybody getting caught up or getting ahead of me. And then when I click, it brings in the next line. So we build this up really slowly, and this lets us do cool things. It gives us control of the conversation in the room, and it sounds Machiavellian, but that's actually what we want, so that we keep the conversation on pace with where we're at as we're trying to explain things. It also really helps people who are data scared. People who are data scared, when they see a full graph like this, they just tune out. They're like, yeah, this is too complicated. I'm not one of those nerds, and they go check Facebook. But when we build it up bit by bit by bit, we're kind of like holding their hand and walking them through our data journey with us. You know, we're actually teaching them data literacy. This is a very cool thing. So when you put graphs on slides, they're going to look like this. They're going to look better than this one. But the point here is that anything that you're tempted to put on your slide in terms of bullet points, you're actually going to pop down to the notes section. That way all that content comes from you, so that you are the person in the room that has the value. And I know that makes things a little bit uncomfortable, but that's the whole idea, that we are the ones who have the value. Our slides cannot hold our value. If our slides have all the value, it doesn't give us a reason for being in the room. So the value has to come from us, not our slides. They're just our visual support. And this is when people start freaking out because, you know, your slides are how you know what you're going to say next, or your slides are all your main points, and you want to make sure your audience will know those main points, or legitimate concerns like English isn't my first language and I want to make sure people understand me. Those are legitimate concerns, but that's why we have handouts, not these, not these. These things, this 3-up notes format kind of handout, these things are useless. They don't have the sort of readability to them or depth to them that we would need later on when our audience is back in their office trying to make use of our information. And you know this is true because you have these thick stapled stacks of these handouts tucked in file folders in your filing cabinet that you're never ever going to look at ever again in your whole life because they're not useful. What's more useful is when we summarize that stuff we put into our notes section into a handout, like a 1-pager, maybe front and back, maybe 2 pages front and back if you have a whole lot to say. And then you would tell people, you are welcome to take notes today, but I'm going to give you a handout with all the information you need. And I'll give it to you on the way out the door. Why on the way out the door? So that they don't just like read it and quit listening to you. Another option I use all the time is a semi-blank handout. So you'll have your headings in here. You'll have maybe contact information, URLs, references, anything you wouldn't want people to have to copy off of a slide. You put it on the handout. But then there's lots of blank space for people to take their own notes. This is a great handout strategy when you know the takeaways are going to be different for all the people who are in the room, when you have multiple audiences in the room. Another reason this one, the blank one, is so good is that you work with some audiences. The choice between these two is audience dependent. When you're talking to like a CEO, she doesn't want to make her own slide or her own handout. She wants to be given the one that's already complete, and she's probably not going to wait until you're done, right? So you just give it to her. But there are some groups that I've worked with. One great example is teachers. Teachers are so used to running a million miles an hour, they can't just sit still in a presentation and listen. It's impossible, you know. They're just go, go, go. And so they're planning their lesson while they're also in the workshop, or they're back there knitting, you know, they're doing something because they can't just sit still and listen. That group really wants to make their own handout. It's going to be great for that audience. So you're going to have a handout at this stage. And a third option for handouts is always anything complicated or dense, like a table or an org chart or a logic model. No one wants to see that stuff on the slide. No one. So it's just too little, right? It's too much and it's too little at the same time, like too tiny a font and stuff like that. So you're going to just distribute those things on paper so people can put their glasses on and they can draw on it and stuff like that. Okay. So let's talk about handout design for just a moment here. You're going to need the questions box again. So here is not exactly a handout. This actually is a newsletter that came home from my kids' school. And you can, this is the front, here's the back. The top part of it up here on the back is talking about the events happening at my local museum over the summer. And the same day that this came home, the museum's own flyer also came home, and here's what it looks like. So they did some things on the museum flyer that make it so much more effective. Like what? What do you notice that they did on the museum flyer that make it work so much better than the school flyer? And I'll tell you, the school flyer ended up in my recycling bin, and the museum flyer ended up on my refrigerator. Margaret says, color, exactly, color. Now, the school used color too. They used the blue paper. They thought, if I put it on blue paper, it will stand out of all the junk in the kid's backpack. Not going to happen. The museum used color to help organize information and to draw our eyeballs to certain places. I see people saying we got a photo. Let me go back here, because guess what? We had photos in this one. But the quality of the photo is vastly different, right? I mean, vastly different. They varied font sizes. I see people saying that they've got font size, they've got white space between the event listings so that your eye can actually be drawn to them a little bit easier. Notice that they didn't put it in like bullet points. They just used white space in this list. Then in the event listing, they have the date in all caps in purple. They have the topic in blue, or in this dark black, and then they have the description in italics on its own line. Whereas on the school flyer, everything just looks like one big blur of gray. And when it looks like a big blur of gray, it's hard for us to pick anything out. People are also talking about the sideways text. Also, that's in a huge font. That's something we probably would be too scared to do normally, but man, it sure works. And this is a template that they use every single quarter. I just get a new flyer that comes home from the museum, and it's a different color instead of purple. It's a different picture, not that cute kid, some other cute kid. And, you know, of course, different listing of events. But it's a template that they invest in once, and then they can just plug in their new information. Now, this is not done by a graphic design department. If you couldn't tell, the museum is completely free. So they don't have like a team of 12 sitting around generating this stuff. This is just somebody who paid attention to the things that I talk about in my books about how we design our data well. If I was to do this, graphic designers would probably use a program like InDesign. If you don't have InDesign, I would just use PowerPoint. I would literally turn my PowerPoint slide sideways, and I would make my whole flyer right in there. So the museum's flyer is the quality that we're shooting for our handouts. So we're going to have slides, we're going to have handouts, and then of course we're going to have reports. So that's the idea, right? We take people through our presentation. They're like, ooh, this is exciting. Give me more information. Then we have the handout. Then they're like, this is amazing. Tell me more. Then we have the report. But this is not going to be the full report. This is just going to be like the heart of our report. It's going to say like our findings and our conclusions, our implications, that kind of thing. It's not going to be the full report because the full report is probably something like 200 pages. You know, the idea is that we're not going to waste people's time in this part talking about stuff like our methodology and whether we tested the assumptions in our t-test. Because if we do that, we are going to lose them. We're going to actually, at this stage, give people exactly what they want without boring them with the rest of the technical stuff that we are going to have to report on anyway. But what we're going to do is take all those technical details, like our methodology, and we're going to put it in an appendix that is going to be a completely separate document, and that thing can be 200 pages long. I don't even care. Only you and like your funder are ever going to look at it, you know? And you have to do that because it's the documentation of your work. And you probably also have to do a slideshow, right? I'm just asking that we edit in a few more steps so that we can meet people where they are with what they need to know from us. This is also when I like to introduce the 1-3-25 reporting model. Here's how it goes. It's a 1-page handout, a 3-page executive summary, and a 25-page report, plus as many appendices as you want. The 1-3-25 model. I've been counseling my clients to do this for a long time now, and it gives us this structure for reporting so that we know what we're aiming for. The 1-3-25 model. I love it. It's super hard to report in 25 pages, especially if you start including a lot of amazing data visualizations. They take up a lot of space, as they should. So we have to really talk about what happens in this 25 pages. The typical way that we report looks like this. Background, literature review, methodology, oh my God, I'm going to die. I finally get to the findings on page 70. I read an article a while ago by a woman named Jane Davidson. She's a brilliant PhD in my field, and her article was called Unlearning Our Social Scientist Habits. And she talks about how we report this way because we've been trained to in academia, as if our audience is a journal reader, another academic nerd. But when we are in the real world, that's very rarely our audience. They don't want to be tortured to page 70 before they get to the findings. They want to get in and get out, and they want to get the answers that they paid us to tell them. So in essence, she suggests that we flip the report. So we start with our findings and conclusions, and that's probably all most people are going to want to know. We could be done right then. If they want to know more, we can get into the discussion and we can ground ourselves back out into the field and the literature. And then anything like methodology, we're going to put at the very end for the few statistical nerds who are still hanging out at the presentation. And then we can talk about the background if we need to, but most of the time, the people that we're reporting to already know their background, so we don't really necessarily have to start with that kind of stuff. So the idea is that we give people the stuff they came for right away, and then we report in the reverse order that we are used to. So this means that we front load our design and we spend most of our time at the very beginning of our report. So we're going to make our key findings pages heavily visual. When we have that 1-page handout and that 3-page executive summary in the very beginning of our 25-page report, that's where we focus our color and our font work and making really beautiful data visualizations. That means we don't do stuff like this, which I did. I put this in a report. It was on page 6, and I gave this to my clients as if they knew what chi-square even was. They didn't. That report was so useless to them, they had to hire a graphic designer to take what we had written and make it into something digestible for them to hand out to the public. And you know what the graphic designer did? The end result didn't even have a single graph in it. Didn't talk about data anywhere. Total fail. So we're not going to do this to our clients. This is what my clients are doing now. These people just won an award for their reporting. And you can see that we've just got basic graphs in here, super simple bar graphs, but we've got awesome titles that tell the point, that tell the whole story that graph is really trying to show. We don't make people guess about what this graph says. We tell them in that precious title space. And that same idea of just tell people your point is also present in the report headings, those orange spaces, right? So instead of like finding one, it says the finding, because you know people are only skimming through the report anyway. You know this, right? I'm sure you do. We all are on this page now, that people are really just skimming for the highlights. So let's take advantage of that fact and use that opportunity that's going to be in a bigger font size. It's going to be in a color. And let's just tell them the key findings. Here's another report from some clients, the Boys and Girls Club of America. Look at how big this graph is. People are drawn to look at pictures. They're drawn with their eyeballs to take their information by looking at the pictures. So our data viz has to be huge. This bar graph takes up 2/3 of this page. I think we would usually be too intimidated for that, but that's exactly what they wanted to do here. Big pictures are really helpful. Here's another report. These are not sequential pages. It's page 11 and page 25. And they're the pages that start new parts of the report. And look what they've done here. I don't love necessarily everything about this layout, but they have these really big, beautiful pictures at the top of these pages. This is how we make navigating through a report more useful in today's age where people are looking at this on their tablets or on their computers. Because if I don't care about part 1, I know I can just scroll, 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 and I'll get to part 2, and I'll know I'm there when I see this gigantic picture. That's how we make reporting useful. We don't just slap in pictures in random places because we need decoration. We do it in a way that makes it useful. Greenpeace did the same thing. This is the first 8 pages after the cover page of their report, and they have these really, really big pictures that mark off new sections, so we know exactly how to breeze right through this thing. I'm going to give you a couple more report examples. So this is the report I was talking about that just won an award. Here's the cover. Here's the table of contents. Notice how we have colored dots next to the main parts of the table of contents. Yeah, we are assigning colors to each section. And then when we are in that section, we use that color almost exclusively. It's the dominant color that's going to appear in that section. This is genius, because this means, you know, if I only care about post-secondary education, I can see that it's lime green, and I'm just going to scroll, scroll, scroll till I hit some lime green. Awesome. Here's what we're not going to do. These are some of my clients. This is their old reporting. This is the way I see people do it all the time, and this is not what we're going to do anymore. So there's a cover page, and I don't know, I question whether we actually really need cover pages anymore. Maybe we just need to get right into it, you know? And then there's a blank page, which is a total waste, because when you're looking at a PDF and you start scrolling and the page is blank, you think it's broken or it hasn't loaded, and then you go check Facebook and you never come back again. So we're going to skip that. Then we got a second cover page. That's useless. Then we've got a page that has, you know, some attribution information. We might need that, but what a big waste of space in there. Then we have the table of contents where it looks like there's enough space at the bottom. We could probably pop in the attribution stuff. Then we have a page that could be argued is just decoration. Then we have a 2-page introduction that could probably be condensed to 1 page, arguably so. The data, the real data, doesn't start till page 9, and folks, the whole report is only 30 pages long. This is full of old reporting ideas that worked when we only printed on paper, but this is not how it is going to function for people who are reading in a mobile world. Here's the end of the report. If you think this is bad, there's even more. So we've got a resources page. Sure, we could use that. References, no. Let's not waste a page on references. Let's just have those as footnotes. Acknowledgements, I'd argue that could probably be a sidebar somewhere else. Then we have a decoration page, another blank page, and then a back cover. Totally not useful. And again, the report's only 30 pages. We had 8 pages at the beginning and 6 here. That's 14 that could probably be condensed into 2. I mean, we're talking about half the report that's just fluff. We can't do this. So what we're aiming for is stuff more like this. This is from my friend Rakesh Mohan. He works for the Idaho legislature. And he is now doing some of the most amazing reporting. He just won another award for his reports because they're so great. We did a couple rounds of workshops together, and now they're knocking it out of the park. So we've got this really beautiful picture on the front that relates to the content they're trying to cover, a beautiful color scheme, sidebars inside the report where they define acronyms next to the place where the acronym appears in the narrative. Genius. Why don't we do that anymore? This is amazing. I love it. We've got icons in here. We've got really, really big graphs. This is what people want to see anyway. So let's make them enormous with awesome titles that tell the whole point. This is the kind of reporting that we're looking for. So I want to talk about sidebars for just a second before I turn things back over to Susanna, because I don't think we use these enough. It's the most underutilized reporting tool I see out there today. Sidebars are a place like what Rakesh is doing here to hold acronyms, or you can kind of hide information. You can do the opposite. You can hide information in a sidebar by using GrayonGrey. And I love this tool we implemented here with another one of my clients, because it's a way to report to multiple audiences in the exact same page, in the exact same report. So Oregon Health Authority reports to like hospital administrators and doctors and stuff like that, and they're talking on this page about PM spending. I have no idea what that means, but that's okay. I'm not their main audience. The doctors and hospital administrators are, and they already know what that means. But Oregon Health Authority knows this report's going to go online where anybody in the public can access it, and they will have no clue of what PM spending means. So if they took the main narrative, if they took that moment up there at the top when they were starting to say, here's our definition of PM spending, their main audience of hospital administrators and doctors would look at that and go, oh, this isn't for me. This report's for Joe Public. You know, I already know this stuff. Where's the real detailed stuff for me? But that's the mistake, because this report is for them. So how can they put that definitional stuff in there? They put it in a sidebar, GrayonGrey. So they'll be skipped over easily by their main audience, but it's there as a supportive tool for those of us who have no idea what they're talking about. Genius. Okay, so I saw a bunch of questions about where can you get copies of my slides? How do I do this stuff? They're all in my books. So effective data visualization is going to walk you through my chart chooser, how to make the best choice for the chart type that you need to use based on your data and the story you're trying to tell, and then how to make it in Excel with step-by-step instructions. So everything that you saw in here today, plus a whole lot more, is all in effective data visualization. And then we just published the second edition of Presenting Data Effectively, and that talks a lot more about the last half of this webinar, which is on how to report well, how to make great slides, and how to use things like color and your text and little extra notes and things like that inside your graphs too, to make those really stand out. So that covers dashboards, slides, graphs, reports, all of those kinds of things. And I know people are still asking about slides, so I'm going to tell you that, as Susanna said, she can chime in here too and correct me, but I think that we recorded this, so people will be able to get the recording too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Stephanie. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Just wanted to confirm what you were just mentioning. So everybody will have a recording emailed to you within the coming weeks, and you can view this whenever you like. Thank you so much, awesome. Stephanie. Are you all finished, or did I cut you off at the end there?
No, you did not cut me off. It's all good. I was just going to turn things over to you for questions.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for that presentation. Really incredible stuff, incredibly informative. And we've already had a fair number of questions coming in from our audience here. Please, folks, continue to send those questions in via the question box at the right side of your screen. You can also send in questions on Twitter using the hashtag SageTalks. If we can't get to your question by the end of the hour, and since there are nearly 500 of you, that seems unlikely that we will be able to do that, Stephanie has kindly agreed to address some of them in a follow-up blog post on our Sage blog, Sage Connection. So we'll send out a link to that as well in the coming weeks. So let's get started. I've seen a question come in a couple times, Stephanie. I was wondering if you would be able to address the use of color, especially when there are considerations around accessibility and folks who are colorblind. Are there any considerations that people would need to take to ensure that their work is 100% accessible to those folks?
Absolutely. Yeah, so color blindness is mostly occurs on the red-green spectrum. That affects about 10% of the white male population in the U.S. Not as prevalent in other segments, but still it's part of 508 compliance. Those of you who are familiar with that, it kind of like strikes terror into your heart because there's so much you have to do to make your work accessible for anybody. So color blindness, basically, since the common form is on the red-green spectrum, it means that we should not be using red to mean bad and green to mean good. So we need to avoid the stoplight color scheme like the plague, if we are concerned about reporting for people who are colorblind. That's one of the most basic answers that I can give, but I'm working on a project with a client right now where we are making their work 508 compliant, and I've been heavily using a color blindness simulator. So if you just Google that term, color blindness simulator, you're going to see these websites you can go to where you'll upload like an image, like a screenshot of your report page or your graph or your slide, and then it will show you what it looks like to people who have different color blindness conditions so that you can see whether it's going to be distinguishable.
Okay, thanks so much, Stephanie. Another question that's come in from our audience, how do you embed graphs into reports from Excel without reducing image quality?
That is a great question, because isn't it a pain? So some of the things that I try to do, and this is an issue that came up when we were publishing the book, because I needed to make sure that the graphs I was making in Excel were going to be print quality. So there were a couple things we did. One of the things was to use a screenshot tool. So I use Snagit. That's what was recommended to me by the folks at Sage. And Snagit lets you take a screenshot and adjust the resolution of it so you can save it in a format that's going to be high quality. There are also a couple of plugins you can get for Excel, so just Google it. The one that I have used is called Daniel's Excel Toolbox. And it's a plugin, so you have to have permission to use plugins, but it'll let you export the elements in Excel as picture files. In the event that none of those things will work, what I will often do is make my graph about 60 to 70% of the way in Excel, and then I will finish making it inside Word, right inside Word, because all of the Excel capabilities are right in Word and PowerPoint for us. So I'll finish my graph making there when I know that I need it to look good still, because then it won't lose any of its clarity.
Okay, thanks for answering that. All right, we've gotten a question here, I guess advocating for the time investment of visualization. So can you provide some resources to help argue for the time investment that such great visualization might take when working in an environment with billable hours or similar constraints?
Yeah. So,
okay, thanks.
Go ahead. Yeah, so there is a person, a very famous author I know, his name's Michael Quinn Patton. He talked about reporting in one of his books and said a third of our budget needs to be dedicated to reporting. And folks, that was before anybody started paying attention to data visualization or the way that our reports actually look. So I'm not going to beat around the bush about how much time it will take you. Now, things that are going to help, there are all kinds of shortcuts that will help. Like Excel lets you save charts as templates. So once you have made your amazing dot plot, you save it as a template, and then you can use it again in the future without having to make it from scratch every single time. But I think it doesn't actually take us as much time as we think it does. It seems like it's a big time investment because the change is so drastic. But in terms of actual minutes of your butt in your chair and your finger and your mouse clicking, it doesn't actually take as much as you think, especially once you start getting pretty fast at it. These days, I make dot plots in about 3 minutes tops. I mean, it goes by so quickly once you get the hang of it. Templates are always going to help. But all of those things still, I mean, no doubt, it's going to add more time than just like popping some bullet points on a slide and calling it a day. But think about the investment that you get. Sorry, let me say that another way. Think about the impact you get for that investment of your time. The impact you get is that your work is clear. People know what you're talking about. I was just talking to one of my clients at the Ad Council, very big group I'm sure you've heard of in the US, and they were talking about how taking this kind of care into their work has been transformative for them as an organization. That their clients are actually caring a lot more about the data and the methods that they used because they were understanding the results so quickly because they took the care to present those results well and clearly. So the impact that we get from that investment is our job. That is our job. That is exactly why we are out there presenting our work in the first place. It's to teach people, and if we're not going to take the time to do that well, why are we even in the business in the first place? I mean, it's a hard pill to have to swallow, but it's totally exactly why we're here and hired. So it's worth it.
All right. Thanks so much. Okay, we've gotten a number of questions regarding the tools that you use to create your visualizations, and I know you work quite a bit in Excel. Just a comment that we've gotten from our audience is that this individual works a lot with teams in Africa and Asia who don't normally know how to use Excel or PowerPoint. So when this person is working with them, they have to start at Excel 101 basically. Are there any other tools that you recommend in addition to Excel, and what advice would you have for a person who is really starting at ground zero with the training?
I mean, there are so many data visualization softwares out there today. I don't use any of them. I don't use any other one except for Excel. On very rare occasions, if a client asks me, I might use something like Tableau. But on the whole, I use Excel. Why? Because everybody pretty much already has it on their computer. Because it lets us, I don't know if it's because Excel is really smart or really stupid, but we can hack it. We can make it make graph types like overlapping bars and dot plots that it doesn't normally make. Other data visualization softwares are stuck in the defaults that they present to you. You can customize it. You can make it your branding colors. You know, you can do all kinds of things with it that you can't do in other software. And most people are already a bit familiar with it, at least in terms of like knowing what some of the buttons mean and where some of the buttons are located. So the learning curve for using it for data visualization isn't as big as starting over from scratch with a brand new program that you've never seen before.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks. A question we've gotten a few times now is related to how qualitative researchers can apply these skills that you go over in your books and that you've talked about in this presentation. Are there any things that you would advise qualitative researchers to apply from your work?
Yeah, so in effective data visualization, we have an entire chapter on qualitative data visualization. Now, it's a short chapter because it's not, that area is not as well developed as quantitative data visualization, but that's an area that I'm pursuing actively. So you can rest assured that I'm going to continue giving you more resources in this area. But the same ideas that, the beautiful thing is we borrow so many of these ideas from research and from graphic design. And those same techniques, like using an action color to draw people's eyeballs somewhere, like the museum flyer did, you know, that same idea applies in a bar graph. We're going to put the action color on the bar, the category being graphed that we really want people to pay attention to. And the same idea also works in qualitative visualization, like with a quote. Let's take the one word in the quote that is actually relevant and make it stand out by using some kind of action color on it. So the same principles are going to apply no matter what it is that we're looking at. But take a look at one of the chapters in effective data visualization. I think it's going to give you some good ideas.
Okay, thanks. All right, another question here that we've gotten a couple of times. We've mainly talked here about data viz in reports. A couple of attendees have wanted to ask about using data viz in scientific articles or journal articles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, to me, journals are a lot like my dissertation committee. You just do whatever they want, right? I mean, if they're like, no, you can't have an awesome title, you need to go back to that generic title that no one knows what it means, fine, just do it because you're trying to get published, you know? But I do think we have to be super careful with the integrity of our graphs in journals. I see a lot of journals still published in black and white, and we're not making sure that like our legends are eliminated and our data are directly labeled instead, because in black and white nobody is going to know what that legend means. I mean, there are still so many strategies in terms of formatting the graph that you're going to find in presenting data effectively that will apply to reporting in a journal. And the same kind of things also apply when we're reporting to like funders, because I've been on proposal review committees many times for different federal departments. And reviewing those things, they get mailed to me and they're all in black and white. So it's the same kind of environment as the journal article. So the same kind of things are going to apply there.
Okay, well, on that note, do you find that the presentation techniques or visualization techniques vary based on the format? Like, for example, something in print, poster presentation, versus something that an individual would be viewing on a screen?
There might be some differences, like, for example, people can sometimes expect interactivity when it's on the screen. But then again, I just read an article by the graphics team at the New York Times. They've been on the leading edge of making interactive data visualizations, and then they looked at the data behind it, and it turns out no one is interacting with them. So I think for a long time here, we've all been thinking, oh, if it's online, it's got to be clickable and hoverable and all this stuff. But it turns out people aren't really using those things. So I'm not really sure, actually, how much difference there needs to be between something that's online and something that's in print. But I think the bigger difference for me is whether I'm there to explain or whether this thing has to stand on its own. If it has to stand on its own, it needs more narrative, needs to have stronger titles. If I'm there to explain, I can get away with much less text because that will all be coming out of my mouth.
Sure, makes sense. Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions before we end here. How do you feel about using bullet points versus small paragraphs, and what type of bullet points are more effective?
How about none? How about no bullet point?
Oh.
Let's just have 0. I think bullet points lead us to construct, they're not even sentences. They're these partial phrases, you know? And when we do that, we remove their user-friendliness. We take out the ability for people to read them in a way that's going to make sense to them later. Bullet points are what we use for ourselves for individual note-taking, you know, like your grocery list, or don't forget these 3 things today, Stephanie. That's fine. I'm the only one who will ever need to decode that list. But bullets, they urge us, they encourage us to report in these partial phrases that don't make sense to people later. So let's skip it and let's write in a user-friendly narrative. Now, of course, you're not going to put all that on slides because that would, you know, full sentences on slides might be a bit too much for people to read, but let's not put any of that on the slide in the first place. Let's have our slides be our visual support and have those sentences come from us.
Okay, I think final question that we have time for today. How do you make certain that you're not unintentionally misrepresenting the data? Are there specific rules that you use, like always start the access at 0, make sure slices in the pie equal the denominator when combined? Any tools like that you would recommend?
So the axis rule that must start at 0 only applies to bar charts. You really have much more flexibility in other places and other graph types. So the way to make sure that the data isn't being misrepresented is to start off by knowing what your story is. You will have already done your data analysis. You will have already seen the patterns, the abnormalities from the patterns. You'll know the point that you're trying to make. So you start with that point, and then you're going to construct the graph that supports that point because you already know what that data is telling you. This means that sometimes you might need to change your axis. So because if what you're talking about, this was the case with my clients at Verizon, you know, a tiny little bump in their line graph was like $1 million. So they don't need an axis that starts at 0 and goes to 100%. They need one that's going to be different so they can magnify that change because it matters. That matches the point that they're trying to make. So I think all of those decisions, other than the rule that bar charts must start at 0, are rules that you have to make up on your own. Maybe that sounds terrible. Don't just make it up, but take common sense and reasoning into play based on what your point is. And so that means we have to start with our point, and that can sometimes be the hardest part.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been a really terrific hour. That's about all the time we have for questions today. If you are an instructor and you're considering one of Stephanie's books for your course, you can request a copy at sagepub.com. If you're not an instructor, but you might be interested in purchasing one of her books, you can use that discount code on your screen in front of you, Data Rockstar, on sagepub.com to purchase her books at a 20% discount. That code is going to be good through the end of the month, and once again, that's Data Rockstar, no space. Okay, thanks so much everyone for joining us, and special thank you to author Stephanie Evergreen. Please be on the lookout for an email that includes a link to view today's entire webinar, as well as answers to some of the questions we didn't have time to get to today. Please stay connected with us on our blog, Sage Connection, for information on upcoming webinars, and follow us on Twitter at @sage_methods. Follow Stephanie at Evergreen Data. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.